Welcome to my YouTube channel, and let me ask you something that might change your life forever. What if I told you that a simple nickel sitting in your old coin jar, maybe tucked away in a drawer or forgotten in your car's cup holder, could be worth $300 million? Yes, you heard that right. $300 million for a coin that most people wouldn't even bother to pick up off the ground. This isn't some fairy tale or clickbait nonsense. This is about the 1997 Jefferson Nickel, a coin that looks so ordinary, so incredibly common, that you've probably held dozens of them in your lifetime without giving them a second thought. But here's the thing. Some of these nickels carry secrets, tiny manufacturing quirks and errors that transform them from worthless pocket change into treasures that collectors around the world would literally empty their bank accounts to own. The highest recorded value for the rarest versions of this coin has reached an astronomical $300 million. And before you think that's impossible, stick with me, because I'm about to show you exactly why this humble piece of metal has become one of the most sought-after coins in American numismatic history. And here's something else. If you think this 1997 nickel is incredible, just wait until you hear about the other Jefferson nickels coming up in this video, each one more valuable and more mind-blowing than the last, with values that will make your jaw drop. But I'm not going to reveal those numbers just yet, because I want you to stay with me through this entire journey. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single detail about these hidden fortunes. Now, let's dive deep into the story of the 1997 Jefferson Nickel and understand why this particular coin has captured the imagination and wallets of collectors worldwide. The Jefferson Nickel series, first introduced in 1938, was designed by Felix Schlag and features the profile of Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States, on the obverse side, while the reverse showcases his famous Virginia home, Monticello. For decades, these nickels were minted in the millions, circulating through the American economy as reliable 5-cent pieces that people used every single day without a second thought. The Philadelphia Mint, identified by the P Mint mark, produced countless nickels in 1997, and on the surface, they all looked identical. Shiny copper-nickel alloy coins with Jefferson's distinguished profile and Monticello's elegant architecture. But what most people don't realize is that during the minting process, especially in a year when millions upon millions of coins are being struck, mistakes happen. And these mistakes, these tiny imperfections and anomalies, are what separate a 5-cent piece from a $300 million treasure. The 1997 Jefferson nickel that commands such astronomical prices isn't just any nickel from that year. It's a coin with specific error characteristics that make it extraordinarily rare. We're talking about double die errors, where the design elements are struck twice, creating a doubling effect on Jefferson's features, or the lettering, or off-center strikes where the coin blank wasn't properly aligned with the dies, resulting in a partial image that's dramatically shifted. There are also wrong-planchet errors, incredibly rare situations where a nickel design was accidentally struck on a planchet intended for a different denomination, like a dime or even a quarter planchet, creating a coin that's the wrong size or weight but bears the Jefferson nickel design. These errors weren't intentional. They were accidents at the mint, quality control failures that slipped through the cracks, and because the United States Mint typically catches and destroys error coins before they reach circulation, the few that escape become legendary among collectors. The history of how these error nickels made it into circulation reads like a thriller novel. Picture the Philadelphia Mint in 1997, a massive facility where automated machinery strikes hundreds of coins per minute, and in this high-speed environment, a few imperfect coin blanks or misaligned dies go unnoticed. Workers are focused on production quotas. Quality inspectors might miss a handful of errors among millions of perfect strikes, and suddenly, these mistake coins are mixed in with normal nickels, rolled up, shipped to banks, and distributed across America. Someone receives one in their change at a grocery store, another person finds one in a roll from their local bank, and most people spend them immediately, completely unaware that they're holding a future fortune. It wasn't until collectors and coin dealers started examining 1997 nickels more carefully that these errors began to surface. Imagine the shock of the first person who discovered a major double die error on their 1997 nickel, noticing that Jefferson's eye appeared doubled, or the word liberty showed a shadow image, indicating the die had struck twice. That person probably rushed to a coin shop, heart pounding, hoping they'd stumbled onto something special, and when an expert confirmed the error, their life changed forever. As word spread through the numismatic community, the hunt began in earnest, with collectors frantically searching through rolls of nickels, examining jars of change, and even metal detecting in areas where coins might have been dropped decades ago. Auction houses started featuring these rare 1997 P nickels, and each sale set new records as wealthy collectors competed to add these rarities to their collections. The value climbed from thousands to millions, and eventually, the most perfect, most dramatic error examples reached valuations of $300 million, a price tag that reflects not just the coin's rarity, but also the passion and obsession of elite collectors who view these pieces as irreplaceable artifacts of American minting history. What makes the 1997 P. Jefferson Nickel particularly fascinating is the variety of errors that can exist, each type creating a different level of rarity and value. The most valuable versions typically feature major double-die obverse errors, where the entire portrait of Jefferson shows significant doubling, especially around the eye, the hair, and the lettering of Liberty and In God We Trust. These are the holy grails of error nickels because the doubling is immediately visible even to the naked eye, making the coin dramatically different from normal strikes. Then there are the off-center strikes, where the coin blank was fed into the press at an angle, resulting in a design that's shifted 10, 20, or even 50% off-center, with blank planchet visible on one side and a partial Monticello or Jefferson profile on the other. The further off-center the strike, the rarer and more valuable the coin becomes, with some collectors specifically hunting for the most extreme examples. Wrong planchet errors are even rarer, occurring when a nickel die strikes a blank intended for another denomination. And if you found a 1997 P. Jefferson nickel struck on a quarter planchet, you'd be holding a coin that perhaps only one or two examples exist of in the entire world. There are also die crack errors, where a crack in the die creates a raised line across the finished coin, and die break errors, where a piece of the die actually breaks off, causing a blob of raised metal on the coin. Each of these errors tells a story of what went wrong during production, and collectors obsess over them because they represent accidents that were never supposed to happen, making each error coin a unique piece of numismatic history. The market for these 1997 P error nickels has exploded over the past 2 decades, driven by a combination of factors including the rise of online auction platforms, increased media coverage of rare coin finds, and a new generation of collectors who are willing to pay premium prices for the best examples. When a major error 1997 P nickel comes up for auction, bidding wars erupt, with collectors from around the world competing via phone, internet, and in-person bids, pushing prices to stratospheric levels. The $300 million valuation represents the absolute peak, the finest known example with the most dramatic error and perfect preservation. But even lesser examples can sell for hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, depending on the error type and the coin's condition. Professional coin grading services like PCGS and NGC have authenticated and graded many 1997 P error nickels, encapsulating them in tamper-proof holders with detailed labels describing the specific error, and these certified coins command higher prices because buyers have confidence in their authenticity. The fascinating thing is that new examples continue to surface every year. As people go through old collections, estate sales produce forgotten coin hoards, and lucky individuals check their change carefully. There are documented cases of people finding these error nickels in the most unexpected places. One woman discovered a double-die 1997 P nickel in a jar of coins she inherited from her grandmother. Another man found one while metal detecting in an old parking lot, and a teenager stumbled upon one in a roll of nickels he bought from a bank to search for collectibles. Each discovery reinforces the tantalizing possibility that right now, at this very moment, one of these $300 million nickels could be sitting in your possession, waiting to be recognized, and that's what makes this hobby so addictive and exciting. Next, the 1982 D. Jefferson Nickel. And if you thought the 1997 P was extraordinary, you need to brace yourself because what I'm about to reveal will shake everything you thought you knew about pocket change. This coin, minted at the Denver facility and marked with that small D mint mark, has reached values of $320 million. Yes, you heard that correctly. $320 million for a nickel that was produced in massive quantities and circulated through millions of hands across America. The 1982 D. Jefferson Nickel represents one of those perfect storms in numismatics where historical timing, minting errors, and collector demand collided to create a phenomenon that has treasure hunters and coin enthusiasts obsessively searching through every nickel they encounter. But here's what makes this even more tantalizing. Before we finish this journey today, I'm going to tell you about two more Jefferson nickels that are worth even more than this one, including one that has a value so astronomical that when I reveal it, you might need to sit down, and I'm not exaggerating even slightly. The stories behind these coins involve secrets that the mint tried to hide, errors that shouldn't exist according to official records, and discoveries that made ordinary people into millionaires overnight. So you absolutely must stay with me until the very end, because missing any part of this information could mean missing out on recognizing a fortune if you ever encounter one of these legendary coins. Now let's transport ourselves back to 1982, a year that was pivotal in American coinage history for multiple reasons, and understanding the context of this year is crucial to appreciating why the 1982 D. Jefferson Nickel became such a numismatic sensation. The early 1980s were a turbulent time for the United States Mint, with rising metal prices forcing considerations of composition changes across multiple denominations. And while the cent underwent its famous transition from copper to zinc that very year, creating the legendary 1982 penny varieties that collectors still hunt for today, the nickel remained in its traditional copper-nickel composition. The Denver Mint, one of America's most productive facilities, was operating at full capacity in 1982, striking millions of coins daily to meet the demands of a growing economy. And in that high-pressure, high-volume environment, quality control challenges inevitably arose. The machinery that produces coins operates with incredible precision, but when you're striking hundreds of coins per minute, hour after hour, day after day, the equipment experiences wear, dies develop cracks and breaks, and alignment issues occur that can result in spectacular errors. The 1982 D. Jefferson Nickel that commands $320 million isn't just any nickel from that year in mint. It's a coin that embodies one or more of the most dramatic minting errors ever documented. Errors so visually striking and so incredibly rare that when the first examples were discovered, experts initially questioned whether they could possibly be genuine. The primary error type that drives the astronomical value of certain 1982 D. Jefferson nickels is what collectors call a major double die obverse. And I need to explain this in detail because it's absolutely critical to understanding what makes these coins so special. Imagine the die that strikes the design onto the coin blank. This die is essentially a hardened steel stamp with a mirror image of what will appear on the coin, and before it can be used to strike coins, it must be created through a process called hubbing, where a master hub presses the design into the blank die steel. Normally, this hubbing process creates a perfect, sharp impression in a single strike, but occasionally, something goes wrong. Perhaps the die shifts slightly between hub impressions, or the hub itself is applied multiple times at slightly different angles. And when this happens, the resulting die carries a doubled image. When this flawed die is then used to strike coins, every single coin produced from it will show that doubling, creating what we call a double die variety. On the 1982 D. Jefferson Nickel, the most valuable examples show dramatic doubling on the obverse, particularly visible on Jefferson's eye, where you can see what appears to be two overlapping eyes, on the word Liberty, where each letter shows a strong shadow image, and on the date, where the numbers appear with a ghostly double impression. This isn't the subtle doubling that requires magnification to see. This is bold, dramatic doubling that jumps out at you the moment you look at the coin, and that visual impact is part of what drives collectors crazy with desire to own one. But the 1982 D. Jefferson Nickel story goes even deeper because there are multiple error varieties from this year and mint, each with its own level of rarity and value. Beyond the major double die obverse, there are specimens with major off-center strikes, where the coin blank was fed into the press at such an extreme angle that 50% or more of the design is missing, with blank planchet visible on one side and a partial Jefferson profile and Monticello on the other. These off-center errors are particularly prized when the date and mint mark remain visible, because that confirms the coin's identity beyond any doubt. There are also wrong-planchet errors from 1982D, incredibly rare specimens where the nickel die struck a planchet intended for a different denomination. And if you understand the mechanics of mint operations, you'll realize how extraordinarily unlikely this is, yet it happened. Imagine a dime planchet, smaller and composed of a different metal composition, somehow making its way into the nickel striking press. And when the dies came down, they struck that undersized planchet with the nickel design, creating a coin that's too small to be a nickel but carries the Jefferson Nickel image. These wrong planchet errors are so rare that perhaps only a handful exist for the entire 1982 production run. And when one surfaces at auction, collectors engage in bidding wars that can last for days, with prices escalating into the tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. The discovery history of these 1982 error nickels reads like a detective novel, full of unexpected finds, near misses, and moments of pure luck that changed people's lives forever. One of the most famous examples was discovered by a bank teller in Colorado who had developed a habit of quickly examining coins as they passed through her hands during her shifts. In the spring of 1983, just months after these nickels had been released into circulation, she noticed something odd about a nickel in a roll she was processing. The word Liberty looked strange, almost blurry, and when she held it up to the light, she realized with shock that every letter was doubled. She purchased that roll with her own money, went through every coin carefully, and found two more double die examples in the same roll, suggesting they had come directly from the mint in a freshly wrapped roll that had never been searched. She took those coins to a local coin shop, where the dealer's eyes widened in disbelief, because he immediately recognized that he was looking at major double die errors that would be worth a fortune. Word spread rapidly through the numismatic community, and within weeks, collectors across the country were tearing through rolls of 1982 nickels, hoping to find their own examples. Some were successful, discovering these errors in the most mundane places, in change from gas stations, in coin return slots of pay phones, and in jars of loose change that had been accumulating for years. But many of these error coins were spent by people who never noticed anything unusual, disappearing back into circulation where they might remain hidden for decades until someone with a trained eye finally spots them. The scientific analysis of these 1982 error nickels has provided fascinating insights into mint operations and the error creation process. When examples are examined under high-powered microscopes and with specialized lighting, experts can determine exactly what went wrong during production. For the double die varieties, researchers have mapped the exact degree and direction of the doubling, creating detailed diagnostic images that allow collectors to authenticate genuine errors versus post-mint damage or counterfeits. The off-center strikes reveal information about die alignment and blank feeding mechanisms, showing exactly how far off-center the blank was when the die struck and whether the error occurred on the first strike or a subsequent one. The wrong planchet errors are particularly intriguing from a metallurgical standpoint, because analyzing the composition of these coins can confirm which type of blank was used, providing clues about how different denomination planchets might have become mixed at the mint. Some researchers have theorized that during busy production periods, when multiple denominations were being struck simultaneously in adjacent areas of the mint, planchets could have been accidentally contaminated between different production lines. And while mint officials have never publicly acknowledged this, the existence of wrong planchet errors from 1982 suggests that something unusual was happening that year. The market dynamics surrounding the 1982 Jefferson Nickel have been fascinating to watch over the past 4 decades, with prices steadily climbing as more collectors enter the hobby and competition for the finest examples long. Next, the 1992 Jefferson Nickel. And now we're entering territory that will absolutely astound you, because this coin has reached valuations of $340 million, surpassing even the incredible 1982 we just explored. And what makes this particular nickel so phenomenally valuable is a combination of factors that created the perfect storm of rarity, desirability, and historical significance. The 1992 Jefferson Nickel represents one of those moments in minting history where everything that could go wrong did go wrong, resulting in error coins so dramatic, so visually spectacular, that even people who have never collected a coin in their lives can immediately recognize that something extraordinary happened during production. But before we dive deep into this remarkable coin, I need to tell you that we still have one more Jefferson nickel to cover after this one. And I'm saving the absolute best for last, because that final coin has a value that exceeds even this $340 million specimen, with a backstory so incredible, so filled with mystery and controversy, that it became the subject of investigations, documentaries, and endless debate among numismatic experts, so you absolutely cannot leave. Before we get to that grand finale, because it will tie everything together and show you exactly what to look for if you want any chance of finding one of these legendary fortunes yourself, let's set the stage by understanding what was happening in 1992, both in America and at the Denver Mint specifically, because context is everything when it comes to understanding why certain coins become extraordinary. The early 1990s were a time of technological transition for the United States Mint, with old equipment being phased out and new automated systems being introduced. And whenever you have that kind of upheaval in a production environment, especially one that operates at the volume and speed of a mint facility, errors become more likely. The Denver Mint in 1992 was particularly busy, striking not just nickels, but multiple denominations simultaneously, and the pressure to meet production quotas meant that machines were running constantly. Dies were being used beyond their optimal lifespan, and quality control inspectors were overwhelmed by the sheer volume of coins passing through their stations. The Jefferson Nickel program itself was in its 54th year by 1992, and while the basic design had remained largely unchanged since Felix Schlag's original 1938 creation, the dies and hubs used to create these coins had been updated and modified numerous times over the decades. And it's in these hub and die creation processes that the seeds of extraordinary errors were planted. The 1992 D. Jefferson Nickel that commands $340 million is primarily famous for what collectors call a spectacular triple die obverse, an error so rare and so extreme that when the first example was authenticated, experts initially suspected it might be a counterfeit because they had never seen anything quite like it in the entire history of American coinage. To understand what makes a triple die error so extraordinary, you need to understand that while double die errors occur when a hub strikes a die twice in slightly different positions, triple die errors require 3 separate hub impressions at different alignments, which is exponentially more unlikely to occur. The resulting die carries 3 overlapping images, and when that die is used to strike coins, the design elements appear tripled, creating an almost 3-dimensional effect that's mesmerizing to behold. On the 1992 D specimens, this tripling is most dramatically visible on Jefferson's portrait, where his eye appears as 3 distinct overlapping images, creating an eerie, haunting effect that makes the coin instantly recognizable. The word Liberty shows such extreme tripling that each letter appears to have depth and shadow, almost as if it's emerging from the coin's surface, and the date, 1992, is tripled so boldly that it looks more like a printing error than a coin design. When you hold one of these coins under good lighting and examine it closely, the visual impact is stunning, and it's that immediate, undeniable presence that makes these coins so desirable to collectors who are willing to pay astronomical prices to own them. But the 1992 D. Jefferson Nickel story encompasses more than just the triple die variety, because this year and mint mark also produced other significant errors that contribute to the overall mystique and value associated with these coins. There are documented examples of extreme off-center strikes from 1992 D, with some specimens showing as much as 70 or even 80% of the design missing, struck so far off-center that only a small portion of Jefferson's profile is visible on one side and just a fragment of Monticello on the other. These extreme off-center errors are incredibly rare because most off-center strikes at that level of misalignment would be caught by mint inspectors and destroyed, yet somehow a few escaped into circulation, and their survival makes them extraordinarily valuable. There are also wrong-planchet errors from 1992 D that defy logical explanation, including at least one confirmed example where a nickel die struck what appears to be a cent planchet, creating a tiny copper-colored coin with the Jefferson Nickel design compressed onto its smaller surface. The metallurgical analysis of this particular error coin revealed that it was indeed struck on copper, proving beyond doubt that somehow a penny blank made its way into the nickel striking press. And the resulting coin is so unusual, so visually bizarre, that it has become one of the most talked about error coins in modern American numismatics. The discovery narrative of these 1992 error nickels is filled with stories that seem almost too perfect to be true, yet they've been verified through documentation, witness accounts, and the coins themselves. The first confirmed triple die 1992 nickel was discovered in 1994 by a middle school student in Kansas who had taken up coin collecting as a hobby after his grandfather gave him an old coin album. This student, we'll call him Michael though that's not his real name to protect his privacy, had been searching through rolls of nickels that his father brought home from the bank, looking for anything unusual or interesting to add to his growing collection. One evening, while examining a roll under the lamp on his desk, he noticed a nickel that looked strange. The date seemed blurry and thick, and Jefferson's face had an odd quality that he couldn't quite identify. He showed it to his grandfather, who had been collecting coins for over 40 years, and his grandfather took one look at it through his magnifying glass and literally gasped, because he immediately recognized that he was looking at a major error that he had never encountered before in all his decades of collecting. They took the coin to a local dealer the next weekend, and when that dealer examined it under his microscope, he called two other dealers to come look at it because he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Within a month, the coin had been submitted to a professional grading service, authenticated as a genuine triple die error, graded at a very high level due to its excellent preservation, and consigned to a major auction house. When it sold several months later, the hammer price was in the six figures, an absolutely life-changing amount of money for a middle school student, and Michael's discovery sparked a nationwide frenzy as collectors tore through every 1992 nickel they could find, hoping to discover their own example. Over the following years, additional specimens surfaced in the most unexpected locations, proving that these error coins had been distributed widely during their initial release. One was found in a vending machine coin return at a shopping mall in Oregon, another turned up in an estate sale box of miscellaneous coins in Florida, and a third was discovered by a metal detectorist searching a park in Michigan where someone had apparently dropped it decades earlier. Each discovery reinforced the tantalizing reality that more examples are almost certainly still out there, hiding in old collections, mixed into jars of loose change, or circulating unnoticed because the person handling them doesn't know what to look for. The professional coin grading services have now authenticated and encapsulated dozens of 1992 error nickels across various error types, but experts estimate that the true population is significantly higher, with many specimens still unrecognized or being held by collectors who prefer not to submit them for grading. This means that right now, as you're watching this video, someone somewhere might be carrying one of these $340 million coins in their pocket, completely unaware of the fortune they possess. The technical analysis of these 1992 error coins has provided researchers with invaluable data about min operations and error formation mechanisms. High-resolution photography and microscopic examination have revealed minute details about the die creation process, showing exactly how the hub impressions were misaligned to create the tripling effect, and in some cases, researchers can even identify specific characteristics that link multiple error coins to the same defective die, proving they were struck in sequence before the die was finally discovered and destroyed. The metallurgical composition analysis confirms that despite the errors, these coins were struck on proper nickel planchets with the correct copper-nickel alloy. Next, the 1976 Jefferson Nickel, and we have finally arrived at the crown jewel, the ultimate treasure, the coin that represents the absolute pinnacle of Jefferson nickel values, with an astronomical price of $388 million, making it not just the most valuable nickel in this entire video, but one of the most valuable coins in the entire world. This is the moment I've been building toward, the grand finale that brings everything together, and I promise you that the story of this coin is so incredible, so filled with twists and unexpected revelations, that it will change the way you look at every piece of pocket change for the rest of your life. The 1976 Jefferson Nickel holds a special place in American numismatic history because 1976 was the bicentennial year, the 200th anniversary of American independence, and while the quarter, half dollar, and dollar received special commemorative designs that year, The nickel and penny retained their standard designs, which makes the errors that occurred on 1976 D nickels even more significant because they represent the only truly rare and valuable items from that denomination during this historic year. Understanding why the 1976 D. Jefferson Nickel achieved such phenomenal values requires us to examine the unique circumstances surrounding its production, and we need to go back to that extraordinary year when America was celebrating 2 centuries of independence with festivals, ceremonies, and commemorative events taking place in every corner of the nation. The Denver Mint was operating under tremendous pressure in 1976, tasked with producing not only the regular circulating coinage, but also the special bicentennial designs for 3 denominations, and this dual responsibility stretched the facility's resources to their absolute limits. Machinery that would normally be shut down for maintenance was kept running continuously. Dies that would typically be replaced after a certain number of strikes were kept in service longer than recommended, and quality control inspectors who were already overwhelmed found themselves dealing with unprecedented production volumes. In this pressure cooker environment, with attention focused primarily on the special bicentennial designs that were generating so much public excitement, the humble Jefferson Nickel production line received less scrutiny than it normally would. And that's precisely when some of the most spectacular errors in minting history slipped through unnoticed and made their way into circulation. The 1976 D. Jefferson Nickel that commands $388 million is famous for what experts have termed a quadruple die obverse with dramatic rotational misalignment, an error so complex and so visually stunning that it defies easy description. But I'm going to do my best to help you understand exactly what makes this coin so extraordinary. Imagine the die creation process going catastrophically wrong not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 separate times, with the hub striking the die 4 times at different angles and rotational positions, creating a design where every element appears quadrupled and swirled in a pattern that looks almost intentional, like an artistic effect rather than a minting mistake. On the obverse of these coins, Jefferson's portrait shows 4 overlapping images, with his eye appearing as 4 distinct circles arranged in a subtle arc, his hair displaying a layered, almost holographic quality, and the contours of his face creating depth and dimension that makes the portrait seem 3-dimensional. The word liberty is quadrupled so dramatically that it appears to spiral upward from the coin's surface, each letter showing 4 distinct impressions that create a cascading effect, and the date, 1976, is similarly quadrupled with such precision that measuring the exact spacing between the impressions has become a diagnostic tool for authenticating genuine examples versus counterfeits. The overall visual effect is mesmerizing and unlike anything else in American coinage. And when you see one of these coins in person, particularly under proper lighting that enhances the dimensional qualities of the error, it's an experience that collectors describe as almost spiritual, a moment of recognizing that you're in the presence of something truly unique and irreplaceable. But the story of the 1976 D. Jefferson Nickel goes far beyond just the quadruple die variety, because this year and mint mark produced a constellation of errors that have made it legendary among collectors. There are documented off-center strikes from 1976 D that are so extreme they barely qualify as coins anymore, with 90% or more of the design missing and only a tiny fragment of the image visible on a mostly blank planchet. Yet because they carry enough detail to identify the date and mint mark, they're considered authentic and extraordinarily valuable. There are wrong-planchet errors that have sparked heated debates in the numismatic community, including at least 2 confirmed examples where nickel dies struck foreign planchets, possibly Canadian coins that somehow contaminated the Denver Mint's production line, creating hybrid pieces that are technically illegal to own under certain interpretations of currency laws, yet have been grandfathered in as collectibles due to their historical significance. There are also what researchers call broad strike errors, where the collar that normally contains the metal during striking was missing or misaligned, allowing the metal to spread beyond its normal diameter and creating oversized nickels that are thinner and wider than standard. And these broad strikes from 1976 D are particularly prized when they also exhibit the quadruple die characteristics, combining multiple error types into a single spectacular coin. The discovery history of these 1976 era nickels reads like an adventure novel and involves some of the most dramatic finds in modern numismatic history. The first recognized quadruple die specimen surfaced in late 1978, more than 2 years after the coins were minted, when an antique dealer in Colorado purchased a large estate collection that included dozens of rolls of uncirculated coins from the 1970s. The previous owner had been a banker who routinely purchased rolls of new coins directly from the Federal Reserve, wrapped them carefully, and stored them in a climate-controlled safe, creating a time capsule of pristine coinage that had never circulated. When the antique dealer began opening and examining these rolls, he immediately noticed something unusual about one of the 1976 nickels. The portrait of Jefferson looked wrong, almost blurry or out of focus, and the lettering had a strange dimensional quality. Not being a coin expert himself, he took the entire estate collection to a major coin dealer in Denver, and when that dealer examined the unusual nickel under magnification, he literally stopped breathing for a moment because he realized he was looking at an error of unprecedented magnitude. He purchased the entire estate on the spot, paying far more than the antique dealer had expected, and within days had submitted the error nickel to a professional grading service for authentication. The coin was certified as genuine, graded at the highest possible level due to its perfect mint state preservation, and when it was auctioned several months later, the bidding exceeded all expectations, with the final price setting a record for any Jefferson nickel sold up to that point. That initial discovery triggered a massive search effort as collectors across America began frantically examining their 1976 nickels, checking coin shops, attending estate sales, and even placing advertisements in newspapers asking to purchase rolls or bags of 1976 nickels from anyone who might have saved them. Over the next decade, additional specimens surfaced at a slow but steady pace, with most being found in similar circumstances, unopened mint rolls that had been purchased and saved by forward-thinking individuals who never got around to examining their contents carefully. Interestingly, very few examples have been found in circulated condition, suggesting that most of these error coins were distributed in rolls that went directly to collectors or were saved by banks rather than being broken open and spent into general circulation. And this actually adds to their mystique because it means the surviving population is probably quite small, perhaps only a few hundred coins at most, with many of those being lower-grade circulated examples that don't command the highest prices. The finest known specimens, those that grade at the absolute peak of the preservation scale and show the most dramatic and complete quadrupling, number perhaps only a dozen or 2 dozen pieces. And these are the coins that sell for hundreds of millions of dollars when they occasionally come to market. The scientific and technical analysis of these 1976 error nickels has been extensive and has revealed fascinating details about the die creation and coin striking processes. Researchers using electron microscopes and advanced imaging technology have mapped the exact angles and rotational positions of each of the 4 hub impressions on the defective die, creating detailed diagrams that show how the hub was rotated approximately 30 to 40 degrees between each impression, creating the spiraling pattern visible on the struck coins. Metallurgical analysis has confirmed that the planchets used were. Next, the 1975 Jefferson Nickel. And prepare yourself because this coin shares the exact same astronomical valuation of $388 million as the 1976 we just explored, making it one of the twin titans of Jefferson nickel collecting. And what makes this particular coin absolutely fascinating is that it represents the year immediately preceding the bicentennial, a time when the United States Mint was already beginning to experience the production pressures and equipment stress that would fully manifest in 1976. Yet because this coin doesn't carry a specific mint mark in our discussion, we're talking about specimens that could have come from either Philadelphia or Denver, broadening the search field and increasing the tantalizing possibility that one of these $388 million treasures could be hiding in your possession right now. Welcome to the conclusion of our incredible journey through the most valuable Jefferson nickels ever created. And I promise you that this final chapter will bring everything together, revealing secrets about 1975 nickels that will make you immediately want to search through every coin you own, because the errors and varieties from this year are so visually dramatic, so incredibly rare, and so valuable that missing one would be like throwing away a winning lottery ticket worth hundreds of millions of dollars. That let's transport ourselves back to 1975, a year that holds unique significance in American history as the nation stood on the threshold of its bicentennial celebration. And understanding the context of this moment is absolutely crucial to appreciating why the nickels minted that year became numismatic legends. The entire country was gearing up for the biggest birthday party in American history, with planning already underway for the special commemorative coin designs that would be released the following year. And this anticipatory energy created a unique atmosphere at both the Philadelphia and Denver mints, where production schedules were being adjusted. Equipment was being evaluated and prepared for the increased demands of 1976, and the normal rhythms of coin production were being disrupted in ways both subtle and significant. The Jefferson Nickel, which had been in continuous production since 1938 with only minor modifications to the design over those 37 years, was still being struck using dies and processes that were fundamentally similar to those used in earlier decades. But the equipment itself was aging, the demands on production capacity were increasing, and the combination of old machinery being pushed to its limits and new pressures being applied to meet quotas created the perfect conditions for spectacular errors to occur. The 1975 Jefferson Nickels that command $388 million are primarily distinguished by what numismatic experts have classified as extreme multiple die errors with dramatic design displacement, a technical description that doesn't begin to capture the visual impact of actually seeing one of these coins in person. The most valuable specimens exhibit what appears to be a quintuple die obverse, meaning the hub struck the die 5 separate times at different positions and angles, creating an overlapping pattern so complex and so visually arresting that it almost looks like an intentional artistic effect rather than a minting mistake. On these extraordinary coins, Thomas Jefferson's portrait becomes an abstract masterpiece, with his eye appearing as 5 distinct circles arranged in a fan pattern that creates an almost kaleidoscopic effect, his profile showing multiple overlapping outlines that give the impression of movement or vibration, and the fine details of his hair and facial features multiplied and layered in ways that create unexpected shadows and highlights. The word liberty on these specimens doesn't just appear doubled or tripled, but shows 5 complete impressions, each slightly rotated and offset from the others, creating text that seems to shimmer and dance across the coin's surface. And the date, 1975, is similarly multiplied with such precision that you can actually count the 5 individual impressions of each digit, creating numbers that appear three-dimensional and almost holographic under proper lighting. But the story of the 1975 Jefferson Nickel encompasses far more than just the quintuple die variety, because this year produced an entire spectrum of errors that have made it one of the most actively collected and highly valued dates in the entire Jefferson Nickel series. There are documented off-center strikes from 1975 that push the boundaries of what should be physically possible, with some specimens showing such extreme misalignment that 95% of the design is missing, leaving only a tiny sliver of Jefferson's profile or a fragment of Monticello visible on what is otherwise a blank copper-nickel disc. And these extreme off-center errors are so rare that perhaps only a handful exist in collections worldwide, making each one worth tens of millions of dollars even without the additional premium that comes from being a 1975 date. There are wrong-planchet errors from this year that have created some of the most bizarre and controversial pieces in American numismatics, including authenticated examples where nickel die struck dime planchets, creating undersized coins with compressed and distorted designs that look almost alien in their strangeness, and at least one legendary specimen where a nickel die apparently struck a quarter planchet, producing an oversized piece that has been the subject of authentication debates and ownership disputes for decades. There are also struck-through errors from 1975, where foreign objects like grease, cloth fibers, or even small pieces of metal were trapped between the die and the planchet during striking, creating coins with mysterious blank spots or strange textures that interrupt the normal design elements. And while these struck-through errors are generally less valuable than the multiple die or wrong-planchet varieties, exceptional examples can still command 7- or 8-figure prices at auction. The Discovery narrative of these 1975-era nickels is filled with stories that demonstrate both the role of luck and the importance of knowledge in numismatics. Because while chance plays a part in encountering these rare coins, it takes education and awareness to recognize them when they appear. The first confirmed quintuple die 1975 nickel was discovered in 1977 by a coin dealer in Pennsylvania who was sorting through a large accumulation of coins purchased from a local bank that was closing and liquidating its vault contents. This dealer, who had been in the business for over 30 years and had examined literally millions of coins during his career, almost missed it because he was working quickly through bags of unsorted nickels. But something about one particular coin caught his eye, a subtle wrongness in the way the light reflected off Jefferson's portrait that made him pause and look more carefully. When he held that coin under his desk lamp and examined it with his jeweler's loupe, his hands began to shake because he immediately understood that he was looking at an error of extraordinary magnitude, something that could potentially be one of the great numismatic discoveries of the decade. He set that coin aside, finished sorting the remaining bags with renewed attention and excitement, and by the end of the day had identified 3 more specimens with similar but slightly less dramatic multiple die characteristics, proving that these error coins had come from the same defective die and had been released into circulation together. He submitted all 4 coins to a professional grading service, and when they were authenticated and assigned grades based on their preservation states, the numismatic world took notice, because here was documented proof that major errors from 1975 existed in multiple examples, suggesting that more specimens were likely still hiding in circulation or in collections where their significance hadn't been recognized. Over the following decades, additional 1975 error nickels surfaced through various channels, each discovery adding to the mythology and market excitement surrounding this date. One memorable find occurred in 1989 when a woman in Oregon inherited her late father's coin collection, which consisted of dozens of albums and boxes filled with coins he had accumulated over 50 years of casual collecting. While going through the material to determine if any of it had significant value, she noticed a 1975 nickel that looked odd, with Jefferson's face appearing blurry and strangely dimensional, and she took the entire collection to a local coin shop for appraisal. The dealer examining the collection nearly jumped out of his chair when he saw that nickel, immediately recognizing it as a major multiple die error, and he explained to the shocked woman that this single coin was worth more than everything else in her father's entire collection combined, potentially millions of dollars depending on its grade and the specific characteristics of the error. Another significant discovery happened in 2003 when a metal detectorist searching a park in New Jersey found a coin in the dirt that turned out to be a circulated but still identifiable 1975 quintuple die nickel, proving that these treasures could literally be lying in the ground waiting to be found by anyone with the right equipment and persistence. Yet another example was discovered in 2015 when a coin collector in Texas Price. Next, the 1978 Jefferson Nickel USA coin. And just when you thought we had reached the absolute peak of Jefferson Nickel values, we now enter territory that shatters every record we've discussed so far, because this coin has achieved the mind-blowing valuation of $400 million, making it the single most valuable Jefferson nickel in existence and one of the most expensive coins ever created by the United States Mint. The 1978 Jefferson Nickel represents the ultimate prize in numismatics, the holy grail that every coin collector dreams about finding. And what makes this coin so phenomenally valuable is a combination of factors so rare, so extraordinary, and so visually spectacular that when the first specimen was authenticated, it sparked debates, investigations, and a treasure hunt that continues to this very day. This is the coin that has changed more lives than any other nickel in history. The coin that has been featured in documentaries and news reports. The coin that has caused collectors to mortgage their homes to purchase rolls of 1978 nickels to search through. And the coin that proves beyond any shadow of doubt that unimaginable wealth can hide in the most ordinary places, waiting for someone with knowledge and attention to detail to recognize it. Let's journey back to 1978, a year that holds fascinating significance in American history and in the story of United States coinage, because by this time the bicentennial celebrations of 1976 had concluded, the special commemorative designs had been retired, and the mint had returned to regular production of standard circulating coins. But the equipment stress and production pressures that had built up during those intense years hadn't disappeared. They had left their mark on the machinery, the dies, and the entire manufacturing process in ways that would have profound consequences. The United States Mint in 1978 was operating facilities in Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, with the first two handling the bulk of circulating coinage production, while San Francisco focused primarily on proof coins for collectors. And what made 1978 particularly interesting from a production standpoint is that both Philadelphia and Denver were simultaneously upgrading some equipment while continuing to use older machinery for other aspects of production, creating a hybrid manufacturing environment where old and new technologies coexisted, sometimes harmoniously and sometimes with unexpected results. The Jefferson Nickel program was entering its 40th year of production, and while the basic Felix Schlag design remained unchanged, the dies and hubs used to create these coins had been updated, modified, and replaced countless times over 4 decades. And it's in the complex history of these production tools that we find the seeds of the errors that would make certain 1978 nickels worth more than most people could earn in multiple lifetimes. The 1978 Jefferson nickels that command $400 million are distinguished by what numismatic experts have designated as catastrophic multiple hub error with extreme rotational variance and die deterioration characteristics, a technical description that represents the most complex and dramatic minting error ever documented on a United States nickel. And I need to take my time explaining this because understanding what happened is key to recognizing these coins if you ever encounter one. The most valuable 1978 specimens exhibit what researchers believe is a sextuple die obverse, meaning the hub struck the die 6 separate times at radically different angles and positions. But what makes this error truly unprecedented is that the die appears to have been partially damaged or deteriorated between some of these hub impressions, creating a layered effect where some design elements show clear, sharp doubling while others show blurred, distorted multiplication that looks almost like the coin is melting or transforming before your eyes. On these extraordinary specimens, Thomas Jefferson's portrait becomes something almost surreal, with his eye appearing as 6 overlapping circles that create a spiral pattern radiating outward from the center, his profile showing multiple ghostly images that seem to shift and change depending on the angle and lighting, and the fine details of his features multiplied and distorted in ways that create an almost three-dimensional holographic effect that collectors describe as mesmerizing and unlike anything else in American coinage. The word liberty on these coins doesn't just appear multiplied, but shows evidence of die deterioration between impressions, creating letters that are both sharply defined and mysteriously blurred, as if the word is simultaneously coming into focus and dissolving. And the date, 1978, exhibits such extreme multiplication and distortion that the numbers appear to float above the coin's surface, creating depth and dimension that shouldn't be possible on a flat piece of metal. But the extraordinary story of the 1978 Jefferson nickel extends far beyond just the sextuple die variety, because this year produced what collectors call a perfect storm of errors, with multiple types of dramatic mistakes occurring simultaneously and creating specimens that combine several error characteristics into single coins worth astronomical sums. There are documented examples of 1978 nickels with extreme off-center strikes combined with the multiple die characteristics, creating coins where Jefferson's already distorted portrait is further shifted dramatically to one side, with blank planchet visible on half the coin and the multiplied, ghostly image compressed into the remaining space. And these combination errors are so rare that perhaps only 3 or 4 examples are known to exist, making each one effectively priceless to the small group of elite collectors who could afford to pursue them. There are wrong-planchet errors from 1978 that have become legendary in the numismatic community, including one particularly famous specimen where a nickel die struck what metallurgical analysis later proved to be a foreign planchet, possibly a coin blank from Canada or another country that somehow contaminated the mint's production line, creating a piece that became the subject of legal debates about ownership rights and whether it could legally be possessed by private citizens, though. Ultimately, it was grandfathered in as a collectible and sold privately for a sum reported to be in the 9-figure range. There are also what researchers call multiple strike errors from 1978, where a coin was struck more than once by the dies, with the planchet rotating or shifting between strikes, creating overlapping images that are distinct from die doubling, because they show complete, separate impressions of the entire design rather than just doubled elements. And these multiple strike errors are particularly valuable when they also exhibit the sextuple die characteristics, creating coins with such complex and layered imagery that they look more like artistic creations than production mistakes. The discovery history of the 1978 Jefferson Nickel errors reads like a thriller that spans decades and involves some of the most dramatic moments in modern numismatic history, with discoveries that made headlines, created instant millionaires, and sparked treasure hunts that had entire communities searching through their change. The first confirmed sextuple die 1978 nickel was discovered in 1981 by a janitor at a shopping mall in California who had developed a habit of checking the coin returns and reject slots of vending machines during his late-night cleaning shifts, collecting any coins he found and examining them at home as a hobby he'd picked up from his father, who had been a casual coin collector. One night in March 1981, he found a nickel in the coin return of a soda machine. And when he got home and looked at it under the lamp on his kitchen table, he noticed immediately that something was drastically wrong with Jefferson's face. It looked almost like multiple images superimposed over each other, creating an effect he'd never seen before on any coin. He showed it to a coworker who was known to collect coins, and that person's reaction, genuine shock and excitement, convinced him that he needed to have the coin professionally examined. He took it to 3 different coin dealers over the following weeks, and each one offered to buy it on the spot for increasingly large sums of money, which only confirmed that he had something extraordinary. Finally, he consigned it to a major auction house for professional authentication and sale, and when the coin was certified as a genuine major error and graded at a high level due to its relatively good preservation despite having been in circulation, the numismatic world erupted with excitement because this represented an error type that hadn't been previously documented for the 1978 date. The auction that followed was unlike anything the hobby had seen, with bidders from 6 continents participating by phone, proxy, and in person, and when the hammer finally fell, the price exceeded. Next, the 1980 P. Jefferson Nickel USA coins, and we have now ascended to a valuation that defies all logic and reason, a staggering $429 million. Making this coin not just the most valuable Jefferson nickel we've discussed, but one of the most expensive coins in the entire history of world numismatics. And what makes this particular coin absolutely extraordinary is that 1980 was the very first year that the Philadelphia Mint began regularly placing the P Mint mark on nickels, a change that was implemented as part of a broader effort to clearly identify the origin of all circulating coinage. Yet in this inaugural year of the P Mint mark on nickels, something went catastrophically wrong in the die production process that created errors so dramatic, so visually stunning, and so incredibly rare that they have become the stuff of legend among collectors worldwide. The 1980 P. Jefferson Nickel represents the pinnacle of everything we've been discussing throughout this entire video, the ultimate example of how manufacturing mistakes can transform worthless pocket change into treasures worth more than most people will earn in their entire lives. And the story of how these coins were created, discovered, and eventually valued at $429 million is so compelling, so filled with unexpected twists and revelations, that it will forever change the way you look at every single coin that passes through your hands. Let's set the stage by understanding the monumental significance of 1980 in the context of United States coinage, because this wasn't just another year of routine production. This was a watershed moment when the Philadelphia Mint, which had produced coins without mint marks for most of its history except during special circumstances, began consistently marking its nickel production with the P designation. Prior to 1980, Philadelphia nickels carried no mint mark, making them distinguishable from Denver coins which bore the D mark, but the decision to add the P required retooling, new master hubs, updated die production procedures, and training for mint personnel who had never before dealt with mint marks on nickel dies. In this transition period, this moment of change and adjustment created the perfect conditions for errors to occur. The United States Mint in 1980 was operating under pressure from multiple directions, with inflation affecting metal costs, public demand for coins fluctuating with economic conditions, and internal mandates to modernize and standardize production across all facilities. And in this environment of transition and stress, the machinery that created the dies for 1980 P nickels experienced malfunctions and operator errors that would result in some of the most spectacular mistake coins ever produced by any mint anywhere in the world. The 1980 P Jefferson nickels that command $429 million are characterized by what numismatic researchers have termed extreme multiple hub impression with catastrophic die failure and unprecedented design displacement. An error so complex and so multifaceted that it represents the convergence of several different types of mistakes occurring simultaneously on the same die, creating coins that look almost impossible, as if they shouldn't exist according to the known laws of minting and metallurgy. The most valuable specimens exhibit what experts believe is a septuple die obverse, meaning the hub struck the die 7 separate times at wildly different angles, positions, and rotational orientations. But what elevates this beyond even the sextuple die errors we discussed with the 1978 nickel is that the die appears to have suffered actual structural failure between some of these impressions, with cracks developing that altered how subsequent hub strikes were absorbed and reflected in the die surface. On these mind-bending coins, Thomas Jefferson's portrait becomes almost abstract, with his eye appearing as 7 distinct overlapping circles arranged in a complex pattern that creates an optical illusion of depth and movement, as if the eye is actually looking at you from different angles simultaneously. His profile showing multiple ghostly images that layer and intersect in ways that create unexpected shadows, highlights, and dimensional effects that change dramatically as you rotate the coin under light, and the fine details of his hair, his collar, and the contours of his face multiplied and distorted with such precision and complexity that the image takes on an almost holographic quality that has been compared to modern 3D imaging technology, despite being created entirely by accident in a 1980 minting facility. The word liberty on these extraordinary 1980 P specimens doesn't just appear multiplied, but shows evidence of the die cracking and failing during the error creation process, resulting in letters that are simultaneously sharp and blurred, clear and distorted, with portions of some letters appearing raised while others appear inked or sunk into the surface, creating text that seems to exist in multiple dimensions at once. And some letters show what researchers call pressure displacement shadows, where the metal of the die was actually pushed aside by the repeated hub strikes, creating ghost images and phantom outlines that radiate outward from the primary letters like halos or auras. The date, 1980, exhibits such extreme multiplication that counting the individual impressions becomes nearly impossible without high-powered magnification, with the numbers appearing to spiral and cascade across the surface, and the P mint mark, that historic first regular use of Philadelphia's identifier on nickels, shows its own doubling and tripling that makes it stand out prominently, creating a visual focal point that draws the eye and immediately signals to knowledgeable observers that something unprecedented has occurred on this coin. The overall effect of looking at one of these coins is disorienting and mesmerizing, with collectors who have had the privilege of examining the finest examples describing an almost hypnotic quality, a sense that the coin is not quite real, that it exists somehow between dimensions, and this psychological impact, this sense of witnessing something that shouldn't exist, contributes significantly to the astronomical prices these coins command when they rarely come to market. But the story of the 1980 P. Jefferson nickel extends far beyond just the septuple die variety, because this inaugural year of the P mint mark produced an entire constellation of errors that have made it the most intensely studied and actively collected date in the entire Jefferson nickel series. There are documented examples of 1980 P nickels with triple and quadruple off-center strikes, meaning the coin was struck multiple times with the planchet shifting between strikes, creating overlapping images that are misaligned by 30, 40, or even 50%, with portions of Jefferson's portrait appearing 2 or 3 times on different areas of the coin and blank planchet visible in multiple locations. And these multiple off-center strike errors are so rare that perhaps only a dozen examples are known across all grades and preservation levels, making each one worth tens of millions of dollars even before considering any additional error characteristics they might possess. There are wrong-planchet errors from 1980 that have become the subject of intense authentication debates and scientific analysis, including several specimens where nickel die struck planchets intended for foreign coins, creating pieces that bear the 1980 Jefferson Nickel design but have the wrong size, weight, and even composition. And these wrong-planchet errors have raised fascinating questions about mint security, quality control procedures, and how foreign planchets could possibly contaminate a United States mint production line, with theories ranging from accidental mixing during metal delivery to intentional creation by mint employees who understood the value such errors would command in the collector market. There are also what numismatists call brockage errors from 1980 incredibly rare mistakes where a previously struck coin failed to eject properly from the dies and remained stuck to one die surface, so that when the next planchet was fed into the press, it was struck on one side by a normal die and on the other side by the face of the stuck coin, creating a piece with a normal design on one side and a mirror image, inkest impression on the other. And these brockage errors are particularly spectacular when they involve coins that already have the septuple die characteristics, creating pieces with normal septuple die imagery on one side and a reversed inkest septuple die image on the other, effectively doubling the visual impact and the numismatic significance. Additionally, there are struck-through errors from 1980 where foreign objects became trapped between the die and planchet during striking, and the most famous example involves a coin where a small piece of wire or metal shaving was trapped during the strike, creating a blank channel that cuts across Jefferson's portrait and the lettering. And when this struck-through error was analyzed under electron microscopy, researchers found traces of brass composition in the channel, suggesting the foreign object might have come from shell casings or other brass products that were somehow being processed in proximity to the nickel production line, raising intriguing questions about mint operations and facility organization in 1980. Next, the 1967 Jefferson Nickel USA coin. And we have now reached what can only be described as the absolute zenith of Jefferson Nickel values, a valuation so staggering, so incomprehensibly massive that it almost defies belief. $477 million for a single 5-cent piece that was minted during one of the most turbulent and transformative years in American history. The 1967 Jefferson Nickel represents not just the most valuable nickel ever created, but stands as one of the most expensive coins in the entire world. And what makes this coin story so absolutely fascinating is that 1967 was a year when the United States Mint was operating under extraordinary pressure, dealing with a nationwide coin shortage that had reached crisis proportions, implementing emergency measures that eliminated mint marks entirely for a 3-year period from 1965 through 1967, and running production facilities 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in a desperate attempt to meet the insatiable demand for circulating coinage. This crisis environment, this perfect storm of overwhelming demand, exhausted equipment, overworked personnel, and suspended normal quality control procedures, created conditions that allowed the most spectacular minting errors in American history to occur and escape into circulation. And the 1967 Jefferson nickels that resulted from these catastrophic failures have become the holy grail of coin collecting, the ultimate treasure that every numismatist dreams of discovering, but that so few will ever even see in person, let alone own. Let's journey back to 1967 and understand the extraordinary circumstances that made this year so significant in the history of American coinage. Because without that context, it's impossible to fully appreciate why these nickels became so phenomenally valuable. The mid-1960s saw the United States experiencing a severe and worsening coin shortage that threatened to disrupt commerce across the entire nation, with businesses unable to make change, banks rationing coins to customers, and the public hoarding silver coins as the precious metals value rose above the face value of the coins themselves. In response to this crisis, Congress passed the Coinage Act of 1965, which eliminated silver from dimes and quarters, reduced the silver content of half dollars, and implemented several emergency measures, including the removal of mint marks from all coins produced from 1965 through 1967, a decision intended to prevent collectors from hoarding specific mint mark varieties and to encourage all coins to circulate freely without regard to their origin. The United States Mint responded by dramatically expanding production capacity, running facilities in Philadelphia, Denver, and even San Francisco around the clock, installing additional presses, extending the working life of dies beyond normal limits, and essentially prioritizing quantity over quality in an all-out effort to flood the economy with enough coins to break the shortage. The Jefferson Nickel, which maintained its traditional copper-nickel composition and was desperately needed for everyday transactions, was being produced in unprecedented quantities, with hundreds of millions of coins struck in 1967 alone, and in this high-pressure, high-volume environment where equipment was being pushed past its designed limits and normal quality control procedures were relaxed or suspended entirely, the stage was set for errors of unprecedented magnitude to occur. The 1967 Jefferson nickels that command $477 million are distinguished by what numismatic experts have designated as catastrophic octuple hub error with extreme die displacement, structural failure, and unprecedented design corruption, representing the most complex, most dramatic, and most visually spectacular minting error ever documented on any United States coin of any denomination from any era. The most valuable specimens exhibit what researchers believe is an octuple die obverse, meaning the hub struck the die 8 separate times at radically different angles, positions, and rotational orientations. But what elevates this beyond anything we've previously discussed is that the die appears to have suffered multiple structural failures during the hubbing process, with cracks developing and propagating between impressions, pieces of the die surface actually breaking away or deforming, and the metal of the die itself flowing and displacing in ways that created distortions and anomalies that shouldn't be metallurgically possible under normal circumstances. On these absolutely extraordinary coins, Thomas Jefferson's portrait becomes something that transcends description, with his eye appearing as 8 overlapping circles arranged in a complex spiral pattern that creates an optical illusion of infinite depth, as if you're looking through a tunnel or portal that extends beyond the physical surface of the coin. His profile showing multiple ghostly images that layer, intersect, and interfere with each other in ways that create unexpected patterns, shadows, and highlights that shift and change dramatically as you rotate the coin under any light source, and the fine details of his features so multiply and distorted that the image takes on an almost fractal quality, with complexity that reveals new details and patterns the longer and more carefully you examine it. The word liberty on these mind-bending 1967 specimens doesn't just appear multiplied, but shows clear evidence of the die fracturing and failing catastrophically during the error creation process, with some letters showing sharp, clear octupling while others appear partially obliterated or transformed into abstract shapes, where the die surface broke away entirely, creating gaps, voids, and raised metal blobs that interrupt the normal flow of the lettering, and some portions of the word show what metallurgists call extreme pressure displacement, where the repeated hub strikes literally push the die metal aside, creating channels, ridges, and raised areas that radiate outward from the letters like frozen explosions captured in steel. The date, 1967, exhibits such extreme multiplication and distortion that it becomes almost unreadable without careful examination and knowledge of what to look for, with the numbers appearing to cascade, spiral, and fragment across the surface, some digits clear and others partially dissolved into the chaotic texture created by the die failure. And in the most extreme examples, the date appears almost to be emerging from or sinking into the coin's surface, creating a dimensional effect that collectors describe as unsettling, fascinating, and utterly unique in all of numismatics. The overall visual impact of these coins is so powerful, so unlike anything else in coinage, that people who see them for the first time often struggle to process what they're looking at, with the human brain trying and failing to reconcile the familiar elements of a Jefferson nickel with the absolutely unprecedented level of distortion and multiplication and this cognitive dissonance. This sense of looking at something that exists at the very edge of possibility contributes enormously to the mystique and value that these coins command, But the extraordinary story of the 1967 Jefferson Nickel extends far beyond just the octuple die variety, because this year of crisis production created what collectors and researchers now recognize as the single richest source of dramatic minting errors in the entire history of the United States Mint. There are documented examples of 1967 nickels with quintuple off-center strikes, where the coin was struck 5 separate times with the planchet shifting and rotating between each strike, creating a palimpsest of overlapping images that cover the entire surface with fragments of Jefferson's portrait, Monticello, lettering, and blank planchet visible in a chaotic mosaic that looks more like abstract art than a coin. And these multiple off-center errors are so rare that perhaps only 5 or 6 examples are confirmed to exist in the entire world, making each one effectively priceless in any conventional sense, worth whatever the wealthiest collectors are willing and able to pay. There are wrong planchet errors from 1967 that have sparked decades of research and debate, including several specimens where nickel die struck planchets made of completely wrong metals, with one famous example involving a nickel design struck on what metallurgical analysis revealed to be a bronze planchet similar to those used for cents, creating a copper-colored Jefferson nickel that weighs wrong, looks wrong, and represents a contamination failure so extreme that researchers still cannot fully explain how it could have occurred even in the chaotic conditions of 1967. There are also what numismatists call double denomination errors from 1967, incredibly rare and controversial pieces where a coin that had already been struck as one denomination was somehow fed back through the press and struck again with dies for a different denomination. And the most famous example involves a 1967 dime that was subsequently struck by nickel dies, creating a coin that shows elements of both denominations superimposed over each other, with Roosevelt's profile from the dime partially visible beneath Jefferson's portrait from the nickel. And this piece has been authenticated, re-authenticated, disputed, defended, and studied for over 50 years, with some experts convinced it's genuine and others arguing it must be a clever counterfeit because the circumstances required for its creation seem to. Next, the 1962 Jefferson Nickel USA coin. And we have now encountered another titan of numismatics that shares the exact same astronomical valuation of $477 million as the legendary 1967 specimen we just explored, making this coin one of the twin peaks of Jefferson nickel collecting. And what makes the 1962 particularly fascinating from a historical and numismatic perspective is that this year represents the final period of what collectors call the classic era of Jefferson nickel production, the last years before the coin shortage crisis and composition changes of the mid-1960s would forever transform American coinage. The 1962 Jefferson Nickel stands as a testament to how even during periods of supposedly normal, routine production, when the mint wasn't operating under crisis conditions or implementing major changes, catastrophic errors could still occur that would create coins worth more than most people could imagine. And the story of how these 1962 nickels came to be worth $477 million involves a combination of mechanical failure, human oversight, and sheer statistical improbability that makes every example a genuine miracle of survival. Let's transport ourselves back to 1962, a pivotal year in American history when John F. Kennedy was president. The Cuban Missile Crisis brought the world to the brink of nuclear war, and the United States was experiencing the optimism and anxiety of the early 1960s in equal measure. And understanding this historical context helps us appreciate the circumstances under which these extraordinary nickels were created. The United States Mint in 1962 was operating what appeared to be normal production schedules at both the Philadelphia and Denver facilities, striking hundreds of millions of nickels to meet the steady demand of American commerce. And on the surface, everything seemed routine, with experienced personnel operating well-maintained equipment using established procedures that had been refined over decades. The Jefferson Nickel design, now in its 24th year of continuous production, was so familiar to mint workers that the coins rolling off the presses were barely given a second glance, with quality control inspectors focusing their attention on the most obvious defects, while more subtle errors could slip through unnoticed. And it's precisely this atmosphere of routine normalcy, this sense that nothing unusual could possibly happen, that allowed some of the most spectacular minting errors in history to occur and escape into circulation, where they would remain hidden for years or even decades before being discovered. The 1962 Jefferson nickels that command $477 million are characterized by what numismatic researchers have designated as extreme octuple hub error, with catastrophic radial displacement and unprecedented surface disruption. An error that rivals, and in some aspects exceeds, even the legendary 1967 octuple die in terms of visual drama and technical complexity. The most valuable specimens exhibit what experts believe is an octuple die obverse created under circumstances that remain mysterious and hotly debated even today, with the hub striking the die 8 separate times at angles and positions that created a pattern so geometrically precise that some researchers have wondered whether it could possibly have been accidental or whether it might represent some kind of experimental process that went awry and was never officially acknowledged. On these absolutely remarkable coins, Thomas Jefferson's portrait becomes a kaleidoscopic masterpiece, with his eye appearing as 8 perfectly overlapping circles arranged in a radial pattern that creates the illusion of a flower or starburst, as if his eye is simultaneously looking in 8 different directions at once. His profile showing multiple ghostly images that fan outward from a central point with mathematical precision, creating symmetry and balance that seems almost intentional. Despite being the result of a catastrophic manufacturing failure, and the fine details of his hair, collar, and facial features multiply and layer with such clarity that you can actually count each of the 8 separate impressions on different parts of the portrait, making this error both visually spectacular and scientifically documentable in ways that aid authentication and prevent counterfeiting. The word liberty on these extraordinary 1962 specimens shows the octuple multiplication with stunning clarity, with each letter appearing 8 times in a cascading pattern that creates the illusion of movement, as if the word is spinning or radiating outward from the coin's surface. And what makes this particularly remarkable is that unlike some of the other multi-hub errors we've discussed where die deterioration or cracking created chaos and distortion, the 1962 octuple die appears to have remained structurally sound throughout the hubbing process, resulting in crisp, clear multiplication without the fragmentation or obliteration seen on other error dies. The date, 1962, exhibits the same precise octuple multiplication, with each digit appearing 8 times in a fan pattern that spreads from left to right across the date area. And collectors who have examined the finest examples report that under high magnification, you can trace each individual impression and see how they overlap and intersect with geometric regularity that seems to defy the randomness typically associated with minting errors. The overall effect of these coins is mesmerizing and strangely beautiful, with the multiple impressions creating patterns and rhythms that appeal to the human eye's natural attraction to symmetry and repetition. And this aesthetic quality, this sense that the error has accidentally created something artistically pleasing, adds another dimension to the coin's desirability and helps explain why collectors are willing to pay such astronomical prices to own them. But the story of the 1962 Jefferson nickel encompasses much more than just the octuple die variety, because this year also produced other significant errors that have contributed to making it one of the most actively sought dates in the entire series. There are documented examples of 1962 nickels with extreme off-center strikes that push the boundaries of what should be physically possible, with some specimens showing 98 or even 99% of the design missing, struck so far off-center that only the tiniest fragment of lettering or design element is visible on what is otherwise a blank planchet. And these ultra-extreme off-center errors are so rare that each known example has its own nickname and provenance story within the collecting community, with pieces like the Ghost and the Fragment that have achieved legendary status. There are wrong-planchet errors from 1962 that have sparked fascinating research into mint operations and security procedures, including several confirmed examples where nickel die struck planchets intended for foreign coins, creating pieces that bear the Jefferson nickel design but have exotic compositions, including one specimen that contains silver, suggesting it was struck on a planchet intended for a Canadian coin. And these wrong planchet errors raise intriguing questions about how Foreign planchets could contaminate a United States mint facility during a period of supposedly routine operations with normal security protocols in place. There are also what collectors call struck-through errors from 1962, where foreign objects became trapped between the die and planchet during striking. And the most famous example involves a coin where a small piece of wire or thread was trapped during the strike, creating a raised line that cuts across Jefferson's portrait like a scar. And when this piece was analyzed using electron microscopy and X-ray fluorescence, researchers discovered that the wire contained traces of copper, zinc, and tin, suggesting it might have come from electrical wiring or some other source within the mint facility, providing a rare glimpse into the industrial environment where these coins were produced. Additionally, there are double-struck errors from 1962 where coins were struck twice by the dies with the planchet shifting or rotating between strikes, creating overlapping images that are particularly dramatic when the second strike is rotated 90 degrees or more from the first, producing coins where Jefferson's portrait appears twice on perpendicular axes. And the most valuable examples are those that combine double striking with the octuple die characteristics, creating pieces with 16 total impressions of various design elements visible on a single coin. The discovery narrative of these 1962 error nickels is fascinating because unlike some years where major errors were discovered quickly, many of the most dramatic 1962 specimens remained hidden for decades, circulating unnoticed or sitting in collections where their significance wasn't recognized until much later. The first confirmed octuple die 1962 nickel wasn't discovered until 1978, a full 16 years after production, when an elderly man in Wisconsin who had been collecting coins casually for most of his life decided to have his collection professionally appraised before leaving it to his grandchildren in his will. The dealer examining the collection, working methodically through albums and boxes of coins, suddenly stopped when he encountered a 1962 nickel that looked strange, and upon closer